Round 4 of the 2023 Six Nations is all wrapped up, and it's a pretty bleak weekend to have been an England fan. France condemned them to a record defeat at Twickenham. And joining me today to discuss whether this is indeed rock bottom are Nick Kane and Brendan Gallagher, as well as former England and Scotland head coach Andy Robinson. Not a great weekend to be an Englishman. Very good weekend to be a France fan. A record home defeat at Twickenham at the hands of the French, who were clinical to say the least. Scotland versus Ireland went a little bit more to script, and Wales battled their way to a first win of the Warren Gatland 2.0 era in Rome. Today, bulk of discussion will be around England, as I've said to you boys. I've got the perfect group of men to do so, minus Chris Hewitt, who sadly can't be with us today. Nick and Brendan are both here, and we're with former England and Scotland head coach Andy Robinson. How are you doing, Andy?
Yeah, really good, thank you.
Good. Great to have you with us. So you just told me you weren't at Twickenham at the weekend.
No, I wasn't. But
watching from home?
I did watch the game and hugely impressed by the way the French played tactically and the execution of their plan. First time they've won there since 2005, and I was the head coach of England that day when we started very well, but lost to 6 kicks that day, 18-16.
Yeah, and well, the French were even more impressive at the weekend. We'll obviously have a lot to say from the England side of things. But first of all, Nick, how good were France?
France were very, very good. I mean, France were outstanding. They weren't, they were better than clinical. They were very physical. They were too physically powerful for England. The idea that England were going to leave them winded and sort of take them to the wire through a faster paced game didn't ever look like materializing, and actually at the end the side that looked, I thought, significantly fitter, particularly in the forwards, was the French, and England really didn't fire a shot. And I think that's the thing that concerns me most. I mean, I didn't disagree with Ellis Genge's summary afterwards that, if you leave it out there, in terms of effort, and there's a gap in class and ability, then you've got to take that on the chin. Although he did say that for 80% of the time he thought that England competed, and I certainly didn't think that there was not the level of intensity that you would have expected from an international side. And I think it was Benjamin Kaiser said on commentary that this was an absolutely crucial game, a pivotal game for France. Well, it was also a pivotal game for England, considering everything that's gone on. And one team passed the test with flying colours and the other one certainly didn't.
And from a France point of view, you said it was a pivotal game. I presume you mean in the sense that just a little bit of dialogue had started to creep in terms of the French having peaked too early. And I'm guessing it's by them passing, it means they restate their claim as one of the primary World Cup contenders for later this year.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I don't think that they'd really fired fully during this Six Nations up until now. They were off it slightly against everybody, I think. But they clearly came looking for an exceptional performance, and they got it. They made very, very few mistakes, and they certainly didn't give England, they gave England barely a sniff of an opportunity to get back into the game. But no, that said, with the exception again of Freddie Stewart, there was no English player who looked as if they were going to, if you like, lead the resistance against the French. There was nobody.
Yeah, that started with the right from the first kickoff, didn't it, Nick?
Yeah,
but with the French catching the ball and not box kicking to Freddie Stewart to catch it, they moved it into centre field and Dupont kicked from the centre field straight away. That sort of Stewart didn't have one box kick to catch, and that's where he's been renowned for, those catching skills. So to have that in their armory to mix up the kicking game shows they put a lot of thought into their tactics.
Yeah, totally the opposite to what England experienced against Wales when Wales kicked absolutely to England's strengths.
Yeah.
I agree with you. They moved him around, And, people have talked about, him maybe lacking a bit of gas. But when you looked at the amount of ground he had to cover during the course of that game, I mean, he would have been well out of gas at the end of it, because he covered a huge amount of ground, and yet he still had the strength to make a single statement for England with his try. I thought he was very good again. But he was a notable exception.
Yeah, and we'll get to any positives for England in a second. Obviously, the stars aligned in quite a lot of ways for France. Dupont, Aldrit, and Tomac Olivan all probably had their best games of the championship. But Brendan, do you think it's a coincidence that the French team looked as complete as they had in the tournament so far, now that Jonathan Danty was back?
Yeah, I think, he makes a huge difference. And Gael Fickelou, great player already, but he seems to just sort of slot in alongside Danty and produce his full array of skills, including his kicking game. But I mean, that was the performance that everybody feared from France. We've been a bit hypercritical of France in the last year, only because they're so good that you can just see a great team there. They were a little bit quiet in the autumn for me, even though they had a couple of good wins. And yes, this is the first time they've hit their straps in the Six Nations. First time Aldrich hit the straps. Olivan with him. Marchand, again, had a much, much better game than he's been having. And then Dupont decided to have one of his stellar games where nothing can stop him. And I don't think any team would have actually stopped France on Saturday. Nobody would have got within 15 points of them. But that's how good they can be.
I'm not sure about that. I think that the game that they had against South Africa in the autumn was a classic, and you saw there a side that can, go toe to toe with them physically, and that is the key component, I think. So I'm not sure about 10 or 15 points, but I
thought there were a couple of leagues above on Saturday. Anything they reduced in the autumn, to be honest, way above. They were, but moments in the autumn.
But then you've got to look at who they were playing, and.
You were playing a team that won the last two Test matches in the Six Nations. We are now looking back on England and saying they were rubbish, but we're saying that a team that was 2 out of 3.
I don't agree. We're not saying that they were rubbish. What we were saying was, I think what we've said, that both of those wins were scrappy wins, and not entirely convincing. And we then saw the gulf in class that there is between those teams at the top, and I put South Africa very definitely in that bracket.
What I like about the French team is the balance they've got. I think when you look at Flamand playing in the second row with Willemse, they've got some speed in that second row, and they've also got some power. You look at their back row; they're interchangeable in terms of that, but also they've got a line-out presence in that back row. They can all carry. They're all very good defenders. They're all very good over the ball. And Cross is a bit like a Richard Hill. He does so much work that's unseen, and and doesn't get the praise for it. But he's a quality player. And then you look at the back line, and I think this year the Six Nations has been really good to see centre combinations come through. And you look at the Scottish centre combination, and then you're seeing Danty and Fickelou play together. And I think that was an exceptional performance from them because they complement each other.
Andy, I was going to ask you, did you think, from an England perspective now, obviously we've sung the French praises, and I'm sure we'll debate whether England were rubbish or whether they were simply outclassed and outpowered by a very good French side. Before Saturday, did you see a feasible route for England to win the World Cup? And has that changed, or do you still not?
I believe England can still win the World Cup, yes. I still think they've got the firepower there, and they've got the ability to win a one-off game. And that's what the World Cup will be about, is the ability to win quarterfinal, semi-final, final. Because England will get into the quarterfinal and have the mentality to be able to do that. What England disappointed me with at the weekend was their lack of execution of their maul and the power that they've got from their maul. It's a really strong area for Steve Borthwick in his coaching, and he's been developing that for this England team. But they had opportunities close to the line. They weren't able to take those. And I think that was one of the areas where I thought England had been improving on, that they weren't able to showcase. Obviously, there's this debate about 10, and that has to be solved. And sort of I think 9 and 10 is an area where we're not sure. Nobody is sure on who's going to be selected, and we don't know. And I think you've got to be able to settle on a 9 and 10 that they're going to be able to perform. I really felt for Van Poortvliet at the weekend, because you imagine playing 9 under the pressure that the England ruck was under, and it was a tough day for him, and not just because he was a bit off it, but also England weren't getting quality ball at any stage, at any ruck. I think there's some challenges for England to actually find a settled team ready to go through to the World Cup.
So this is the interesting debate that's been circulating, is with Jack Van Poortvliet, who certainly was off his game or certainly didn't have his best day, and Marcus Smith, the Marcus Smith experiment particularly. Was it a failure, or was it because the England pack got overpowered so significantly up front? And it'll come to you again.
Yeah, I think every ruck was challenged by the French team. One, because of the good low tackle, but also because of the expertise of the second man coming in and being strong over the ball, if not winning it, putting the ball presentation under huge pressure. And then the ability of the two guards, of the French guards, to any little spillage, poor ball presentation, they were on it in so quickly. So that's what put Van Poortvliet under pressure. When England established the go forward, they looked good, and they had time on the ball. And that try that they scored with Stewart was a quality try, and that was some really good ball carries, hitting edges of shoulders, and England, it looked comfortable for England when they scored that try. But at no stage in the game did they ever find that rhythm at any other time.
8 penalties conceded in the first half, most of them at the breakdown. And England's breakdown technique was shown to be, I think, woeful. I mean, they're off their feet. They're over the top of the ball with hands over the top. And, these are things that I think that you expect international players to have absorbed by now. So that's why when I say England were dreadful, I think that they were.
But the French ball carriers were phenomenal in the way that they carried. Audrey, his ability to stay up and win the collision in the manner that he did. And I think that was one of the elements for England in terms of the ball carrying. The carriers weren't able to get between defenders and attack the space. They were running at defenders and being chopped to the ground very quickly. So England weren't able to establish that go forward. And then the support was slow.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the elements to it. You got to get quicker support, and the ball carrier's got to stay on his feet longer.
And it was a big shock to the system, wasn't it? Because against Wales, it was the back row pretty much that won the game for England. I thought they were outstanding. Even if I have seen a couple of collages on Twitter about that game from Welsh supporters suggesting England were up to all sorts of illegalities and getting refereed very leniently. Now, there might have been a little bit in that because, they did get, as Nick said, they got pinged a lot on Saturday at the breakdown, but they just disappeared compared with that French back row, which, as you say, Andy, is so well balanced. It comes at you from all angles. And England didn't seem to have a plan B when that guaranteed pill from the back row, quality possession, seemed to dry up. There wasn't a plan B, because if you look at the set pieces, I saw some stats which are pretty much the same as France. Scrum line out. There was almost no difference between the two teams, remarkably, given the scoreline. It was all in the back row.
The quality of the ball from the set pieces. This is one of the things that gets overlooked. We got data overload at the moment.
Yeah.
Stats about, England won all their line-out ball. Yeah, they did, but half of it was rubbish. A lot of it was very, very scrappy, very loose, and they were knocked back. Incidentally, I take the point about the visibility of the two back rows was massively different. But, 3 of the penalties certainly that England conceded were conceded by Carl Sinclair, either for not releasing or for, going over the top at the breakdown. So it's not just the back row forwards. I think most of them are actually pretty adept at the breakdown. I think it's perhaps the front five that need a fair amount of work in that regard.
But we, so I'm talking about the French back row and their carrying ability. You've also got to add Dupont in there, and Dupont, sort of his ability to attack the guard and second defender allows time, because you've got to sit and defend him. Allows time for the back row to come onto the ball, and for Van Poortvliet, he didn't really run and didn't really attack, and sort of to get your forwards into the game, you need a 9 that is sharp enough to attack around guard and bodyguard, whatever you want to call him, but also to have the sort of to run. And I think that's what we've got to get the balance into the game, as well as playing to Marcus Smith and to the outside backs. We need our 9s to be able to run and be a running threat, and that will give the English players the time to come onto the ball and pick the lines that they need to pick. And I think within all this, so probably in the forwards, you're looking at your best ball carriers being Ludlam, and so he didn't really get into the game enough, but he's a strong ball carrier. And then you're looking at Genge and Sinclair. Those are the 3 real big ball carriers that we've got, and so we've got to find a way of getting some more ball carriers into that pack and into the game.
Yeah, how difficult though, Andy, for a scrum half to make the sort of breaks that you're talking about, given the breakdown situation that he was and situation overall that he was confronted with, which was one of no momentum.
Oh, very tough, very, very tough, and that's where you've got to be able to pick sort of pick your moments of when you do get a really good ball carry to then try and expose that area. But you're exactly right. Sort of, I think any scrum half would have hated playing in that game. Whether it be Matt Dawson, Kieran Bracken, some of our greatest scrum halves, they would have found it tough. However, what I would have said is that Kieran Bracken and Matt Dawson would have had a real go at the English forwards or the ball presentation and told them to sort it out or to get off the field. So that's something that I think is missed sometimes, is the ability of our 9 and 10 to dominate the forwards to make sure that they do deliver quality ball.
Do you think Jack Van Poortvliet is capable of that? He's not necessarily he's obviously very young and he's very green in an England team where there are some more experienced heads, not least in the forwards. Do you think Jack Van Poortvliet needs to be given that green light to say to your senior players, your Genges, your Itojes, your Currys when he's fit, to sort of get their act together?
Of course he does. Then that's the 9. He's in that position. He needs quality ball, and he has to be given the ball on the plate.
Dawes did that from about the age of 19, didn't he? Bossing people around, and Kieran in his own way knew exactly what he wanted.
Exactly. And that's a key quality for your 9. The great Aussie coaches that I've met and chatted to, and Scott Johnson and Eddie Jones, will always say that your 9 is a half back and a half forward, and they've got to be able to play that way.
Well, Dupont certainly manages it.
Brendan, I'm interested that you brought up the breakdown because it brings me to 2 names in particular that I don't think have been the same at the breakdown since the 2019 World Cup, and that's Maro Itoje and Tom Curry. Obviously, I know Tom Curry isn't fit at the moment, but I would say those were 2 of 3 or 4 genuine world-class players England had at the 2019 World Cup, and they haven't been since. Not really a question, but it seems to me that England aren't getting the best out of anyone at the moment and haven't been actually for 3.5 years.
Well, Itoje's a mystery, isn't he? I mean, the electricity's gone out of his game. He used to do extraordinary things, make incredible turnovers by hook or by crook. And he used to run much more dynamically, and we're not seeing that. Now, he has hinted at this illness condition ever, which he hasn't revealed what it is, but he seemed to be indicating he was over it last week. Well, it certainly didn't show in his performance. He was still lethargic, still doing, the basics that line out fairly well. But you're going to have to ask the question fairly soon whether perhaps he needs a bit of a rest or a drop in just to give him that kick up the backside that every player in history has probably needed at some time. Tom Curry, well, he's not here to defend him. He hasn't had an opportunity to present his case really in this tournament, but we were a bit worried about him anyway, weren't we, during the autumn? Possibly overbulked, done the too much time in the gym, lost a little bit of that flexibility, versatility around the breakdown. But he's young. I would like to think he's going to come again. He had quite a lot of miles on the clock in a short space of time from the moment he broke in. Lions tour, very, very physical player. Taken out a bit of a battering. It might be he was having a quiet period. But England, if they'd have any chance in the World Cup, and they have got a good draw, as Andy says, it's not impossible. They had a couple of big matches at the tail end of that tournament, but they will need Tom Curry back to his best, and they will need Maro Itoje back to his best, no question.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I think that England have got to move away very, very quickly from the mentality, where Steve Borthwick is talking about an inheritance where England were good at nothing, and so on and so forth. We really need him now to tell us what he's going to do about it and how he's going to get England to that state. Your earlier question, can they win the World Cup? Well, where we are now, there's not a chance, even with a favourable draw. So what we need to know is, in terms of fitness, power and speed, because their conditioning doesn't seem to be where it ought to be. Their mentality didn't seem to be where it ought to have been in terms of the intensity that they needed to bring to that game against France. There are so many areas where they seem to be off it. The set piece was exposed very badly. I've seen player ratings and so on and so forth about Genge and Sinclair. People are very sold on the idea of having footballing props. And look, I am too. But their primary job is still to scrummage. And the try that France scored on the stroke of halftime was absolutely textbook. It was textbook. They put the squeeze on, they got the drive on, they got the right shoulder. The England back row was completely out of commission. Aldrit picks up, and they executed it beautifully. But Genge went backwards at a rate of knots. Sinclair went backwards at a rate of knots. Now, we've seen it against South Africa. We've seen it against New Zealand. So when it gets to the acid games, and I'm not saying that the scrum is the be-all and end-all of the game at the moment, because it certainly isn't. But there are critical moments, as we saw against South Africa in 2019, and particularly when you get to the acid games in World Cups, in big tournaments, Six Nations, World Cups, where if you're exposed in that area, they will, or if you're weak in that area or have a weakness, they will expose it. Somebody will expose it. And at the moment, these two props are not, people have talked about them being world class. Well, they are not world class scrummagers. Of that, there is no question.
But I think the key to this, Nick, is to have a depth of squad so that they're put under pressure to perform. And if they're not performing, you bring somebody on that is as not better or of similar quality. I believe at the moment that our bench is not strong enough or is not pushing enough those players. So therefore they wouldn't be selected as starting players. And I think that's what we need to find around the whole of the team, is what that second team would be. And credit to Ireland, what Andy Farrell did in the summer of going to New Zealand with that big squad and finding those reserve players, puts pressure on every single player to perform. And I think that's the key for England over the next, for this game against Ireland, and then in the warm-up games, they've got to find players that can be the starting player and therefore put pressure on the person that is in that position to perform. Because
you touch on that, Andy, but one of the problems surely is that in the last Premiership RFU deal, the England A team has been written off. There is no, you know, and the England A team, okay, Ireland last summer, it was the Ireland squad, but they basically took an A team as well to play the midweek matches, the series against Maori. That just doesn't exist for England anymore. Last time the A team played, they went down to South Africa and beat 2016 and beat South Africa 2-0, South Africa A. So I think there's a big missing part of the jigsaw here for England if you want to build that strength in depth and get that pyramid working as it should be working.
I agree. You know, the A team is a vital cog, that, because you need to see players playing away from their club. You need to see what they're like in the international environment, how they play with other players, how they can perform away from home or in in another country, and that's vital when you think about the mix of squads and being able to be in a training week. You know, how do you deal with a training week? How do you deal with rooming with somebody else? Yeah, all these things come into play, and you have to then deliver a performance. And I think, you know, so we're not sure about what our bench is, or those next players coming in. And I think that's I agree about, you know, sort of Genge and Sinclair having to raise their performances, but they're not being pushed by anybody at the moment.
Well, I think that there's, you know, I mean, there are people that we're certainly not blessed in terms of front row forwards at the moment. Many more loose heads who are pushing for that standard than tight heads. One plus sign is the fact that one of the best scrummaging tight heads in the Premiership, Will Collier, has actually come back into the squad this week. So that's good news, because it will begin to generate a bit more competition. Personally, I cannot understand how Rapava Ruskin, after the last 2 seasons he's had, is not part of the equation at loosehead and putting real pressure on Genge. And Marler, I mean, Marler's an enigma. You know, nobody knows what's going on there, but as I understand it, he's available for England. And in terms of scrummaging looseheads, he is the best scrummaging loosehead in the country. So there are all sorts of things that you know, Steve Borthwick has got to address, and particularly in terms of the front row and the front five, probably. There's a lot to do. You know, I mean, one of the things, Andy, that I wanted to ask you about, when you go back to 2003 and the build up to 2003, the amount of extra work that was being done by players to get themselves to that standard, you know, that world class standard, if you like, was, you know, we all knew about it, you know, at the time and afterwards. These guys were working incredibly hard to get to that pitch, if you like. I wonder, you know, just looking at these players and looking at the Premiership as well, which seems to be sort of semi-competitive at the moment. You know, you look at the basketball scores that are going on, you're asking what's going on in defence. And whether the Premiership is actually preparing these players for this level. You know, you look at guys coming out of the top 14, they've got an edge and a bite to them. Our players didn't on Saturday at all. And I just wonder whether it's possible in this environment to get that extra, because they've got 6 months, that's it. You know, they've got 6 months to get there. Whether it's possible to do it in that time.
It is possible to do, because they will have the summer where they'll have their training camp and they'll be able to really raise their standards there, and they'll have a clear run-in as a squad working together and to get to the World Cup fit and hungry. I think one of the questions that you asked, I think we're going to find an answer on Saturday when they play Ireland. I believe we're going to see a really good England performance at the weekend, and I think that will answer some of the questions that and the doubts that have been put about by this performance, because there were improvements against Italy and Wales. Now we've been smashed in a game. Can we respond? And every rugby player would have gone through a beating like that, and then it's about how you then perform the following week. And what will be key for this England group is to really set the marker down with an outstanding first half performance against Ireland, and then to see it through for the whole 80 minutes. And I think if we see that, then you will see the grounds that are there and the necessary elements that these players can deal with adversity, but also can respond the following week. And the talk that is done will be matched by walking the walk. And I think that's a big part for us, because everybody's been in that situation of being spanked in a game. Is now how do you deal with it? And what I would say about that group of 03 was that whenever there was that loss, they picked themselves up and performed the following week, and they had that ability to do that because of the pride that they had, because of the togetherness that was there, but also because of the competition for places. Because if they didn't deliver, they were gone, and somebody else would come in. And this is the key for the players this weekend, is to really stand up and perform.
Well, I suppose a good sign is that Steve Borthwick has shown that he's not going to stand on ceremony. He made changes for this game against France, and has basically said that he'll pick a team that he thinks is the right one, or pick individuals that are the right one to do a job.
I can't, the other thing I can't talk about the current players in terms of how much work they're doing, but what I will say about the 03 squad, their self-drive that they had to get themselves to the position that they got to was incredible for me. And and it was working with the clubs, but also the work of someone like Dave Redding going in and giving them advice and giving them extra programs to push themselves to the limit that they needed to get to was phenomenal. And
so hopefully this is what Aled Walters will now do with England.
Yes, you hope so, but also what you're hoping is that there is an accommodation that those players can get the right balance. They get the right balance of training and still be able to perform in the matches, because we want the quality of the Premiership matches to be better quality. That's a key element that we need to that needs to be raised. There are some fantastic finishes, and there are some incredible score lines, and it's quite exciting. But I think some of the quality of the games aren't at the highest level. What I've been watching.
Well, and that that breaks into a much wider debate about ring fencing and so on, and whether you'll actually get that sort of intensity where you have a ring fence league, because it certainly doesn't. It's certainly not there at the moment.
We can do, because the Irish have got it. So there's Ireland are there with it, and the performances of their promises. It's just they've got a really good academy that they've grown, and the quality of player, the style of game that they're playing, the skills that they've got under pressure. So they've got the ability. They've shown over the last 10 years how to develop players and keep bringing players through. So there's no reason why that can't be done in England.
Yeah, I mean, I differ a little bit insofar as the URC is not the be-all, end-all. They rest players constantly throughout that and bring young players through. That much I would say. Their big mindset is towards the European competition, and they do pretty well in it. But that's a tournament. That's a high quality tournament. And obviously then they concentrate very much on the international game.
One thing I wanted to raise, I spoke to you about it briefly, Andy, was the England blueprint and whether rugby is starting to just move on from that. And Brendan, I'm finding that obviously if you think about the Six Nations, we've now got two clear tiers between Scotland, Ireland, France, and Wales, England, and Italy. And obviously Italy have been on the up, England and Wales have been falling away a little bit. And it seems to me that the two teams that have fallen away, England and Wales, do play close to that traditional brand of rugby that's not particularly expansive, based on a strong set piece or a strong kicking game. And are we saying then that, Brendan, to be able to keep up, it's not just a case of that anymore, but it's, playing the French flair or just having that Irish machine that's actually necessary. And if England and Wales don't adapt, they're going to find themselves falling further and further behind.
Well, it's always nuanced, isn't it? I mean, yes, France play fantastic rugby, but it all starts up front. Ireland also plays some very, very fluid rugby, exciting backs, but again, it all starts up front. Italy at the moment, if you take them, for example, they've got great backs, and in fact, they've got good forwards, but they're not meshing the two properly like France and Ireland do, and Scotland on a good day. So I don't think you don't put all your eggs in one basket, but you just have to be aware of your strengths. If you've got the killer players out wide, you have to use them, and you use them when it's appropriate. But you have to win the ball for them. I mean, it's not rocket science. You can't just put too much weight on one emphasis of your game. You've got to have that balanced game. England are way out of kilter on that. They don't, for a start, as ever, we get back to they don't know which fly half they want. So if you've got that debate going on at fly half and halfback, that means you're not getting the balance between forwards and backs automatically. It's not happening because you're not sure what the message is.
Brendan, did you watch the under-20s game as well?
I watched a bit of it, and France were as dominant in that as they were on Saturday. I mean, that was the full France under-20. They filled two under-20s basically. The one early in the tournament, which doesn't have their T14 players, and then the big boys come in at the end. Because I mean, Italy should have beaten France this year at under-20 level earlier in the season. But no, France were hugely impressive. I don't think it's a vintage England under-20 squad, but they were very, very impressive, France.
But that's the point that highlights, is that the under-20s is usually an indication of what's to come, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a pretty good indication.
If it's not a vintage England under-20 squads, is this something that we're going to have to get used to for a little while? Isn't England being a tier 2 Six Nations side?
Well, nor was it vintage last year, by the way. It was the year before. They won the Jack Van Borthwick captained the skipper the side to that summer European under-20 championship, which was like in place of the World Cup that year. So that's 3 years ago. But no, England weren't vintage this year. They weren't vintage last year, and it's not an absolute hard and fast rule, but it's we see what's happened to France when they started tapping into their under-20s properly. It's a pretty good guide as to what could be achieved if the progression is correct, if everybody's tapping into it correctly.
But also, if you look at the strength of England, it came from Ford, Farrell, Tuolangi all playing together, didn't it? And that, and George, and that moved into that England side. And Natoji was successful with his England.
That era.
And that moved in. So that gave them the confidence to have players that were used to beating New Zealand, had been, sort of champions of the world. So they had confidence that the players they're up against, they knew that they could deliver against. And I think there is a real strong correlation.
And that's 10 years ago, mind you. See, that's, England since then haven't really set it on fire. They've had some decent tournaments, but they haven't had that golden clutch of 2 or 3 years together for 10 years now.
So do you think that puts into question what we're doing with our academies?
Yeah, that's
how
what
we're growing players and how we're coaching players.
Yeah.
That's a very big subject. Over the years, I've had pretty strong views on that. Are you producing the club player to play professional rugby in the Premiership? In which case you take them down that route. Are you letting them free and loose in school? I like to see schoolboy players just learning the game, doing what they do best, and bringing in that sort of fine-tune coaching as late as possible, if I'm actually honest. I think there's been too much academy coaching from about the age of 15, 16 almost, and it produces this stereotype player, and we're crushing the brilliance and natural aptitude of young sportsmen and women who are brilliant at all sports and can bring that into their game in the more relaxed school environment.
Well, I had Ian Bolshaw, Mike Tyndall, and Steve Borthwick in my academy. Now when I was coaching Bath, that wouldn't happen nowadays because they were from Lancashire and Yorkshire, and I wouldn't be allowed to bring them in.
You're only allowed those schools in your catchment area.
Exactly, and I think for me, sort of part of your growth is going to different environments, but also, sort of challenging yourselves to live away from home and to be able to still become successful. through that and become a whole person. And by the time they were 20, they were in the Bath team, and that was the Bath team that had won the Heineken Cup in '98. And by '99, 2000, they're in the team and performing well, and then selected for England. And I think as youngsters, and I think that's one of the important parts for me about it. It was that nowadays that wouldn't happen because they would be in their own environment, even maybe still living at home from where they are.
It's an odd thing. I mean, London Irish are in that area where they can tap into sort of Surrey schools, Berkshire, Wellington College. So London Irish do produce some belting young bats, but their catchment area is really, really blessed in that respect. And I just often wonder if you're a Leicester, Leicester in a coach, and you spot a young player at the Roslin Park Sevens next week from Cranley or London Irish. Are you allowed to go anywhere near them? You're not, are you? Because they already have to feed in to the Southwest London, Harlequins, London Irish. And it seems a little bit restrictive to me.
Yeah. I guess Leicester have been casting their net as far as Norfolk, haven't they? Norfolk, Suffolk, etc., etc.
Yeah, but that's their designated.
That's their area.
Yeah.
But also, I had I was coaching Bristol. Ellis Genge was sort of with me then, and an opportunity arose for him to go to Leicester, and Bristol are in the Championship. For whatever reasons, he went to Leicester, and it was for me was the best thing for him. In terms of going to Richard Cockerell, being not the top dog there, being able to sort of really have to knuckle down and work hard, be challenged by people. Though there was probably nobody that could challenge him at Bristol. Nobody, he was the toughest guy in the squad. There was nobody going to, knock him down. He's the king of Bristol. He goes to Leicester, and I felt it really, shaped him to the person that he is. And it's great that he's gone back to Bristol, but I think we all need that at times. We all need to go to new environments to be able to shape ourselves and to push us to another level.
Are we also seeing a chasm here? Just going back to Andy, your point about England A, and in the past year, we've, for example, seen the New Zealand A teams, Ireland A teams, they've all had tours. England A also haven't. And one thing that creates, we speak about the England under-20 sides and conversions from great under-20s players to good international players. But it means that there's this massive gap between the last time you put on an England shirt in under-20s context to that first game in the senior team. You look at Marcus Smith, who had a 3-year gap or whatever, and Eddie Jones took his time to finally give him his go. Jack Van Portfleet has had a massive gap. That assimilation, like you say, would surely be facilitated by regular appearances in an England shirt, be it, I don't know, not an under-20s team, but a pseudo under-23s team playing a few friendlies or something, which I don't think is the most far-fetched idea in the world. But just so you don't have 3 or 4 years without putting a red rose on, without experiencing some sort of international environment in some sort of way.
I think it's vital for the growth of any international team, but also it's the use of, you can use some experienced players to help those youngsters, navigate their way through a game. And it provides competition for places, but it also allows, sort of brings in some coaches as well. So your coaches are there working with that A team. So that I think it's a win-win all the time. For me, sort of being able to play in the A team, and it enables you also to put a performance in. And England A played Scotland A, and hadn't picked Stuart Hogg for the senior team, and he had a great performance, and Scotland A beat England A in Kelsa or Gala, it was in Gala, and then the following week he was involved in the Scotland team that went down to Wales because of his performances. So it means you're able to see players and see how they're playing, and then if you need that next person to step in, he's playing well, so therefore you bring him in. So I think
I remember seeing Jason White in an A match on Friday night up in Scotland, absolutely atomised England A. And he hadn't been capped at that stage. Next week, he's in the Scotland team.
Yeah.
You know, it's a proving ground, A matches.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. And England A tours have been extremely important in terms of the development of the team until the arrival of Eddie Jones, where he seemed to sort of completely ignore what happened in that South Africa tour that you mentioned earlier on, Brett.
Yeah.
The only problem is that, you know, with the amount of fixture congestion that there is, getting the agreement of Premiership sides to release yet more players to England for tours looks to be a pretty forlorn hope at the moment. So
if you go down to 10 teams, then you'll be able to create that, won't you?
You might be able to, Andy. I don't know. You know, it depends on what cup competitions are put in place and so on and so forth. There's never any shortage of ideas for sort of filling the fixture calendar, I don't think at all. But England A should take preference. I agree with that, definitely. But the other problem that I think England A had is that apart from the Maori and perhaps the South Africans, everybody else shelved their A sides. Mind you, playing the Maori and the South Africans on a constant basis wouldn't be a bad idea either.
Feels like the Rugby Paper podcast is due another discussion on the England rugby as an institution. I'm going to put a pin in it for today, just because we've not got too much time left. But certainly after the Six Nations, I think we need to dig deeper into the roots of English rugby. Now, let's do a brief recap of the other games before we move on. Ireland-Scotland, I think, was another example of an Ireland team, Andy, that can get the job done no matter what. I can't remember who the interview was with, but it was one of the starters, and they said that at halftime they were laughing because they'd lost Dan Sheehan to injury. Gallagher couldn't throw because of his shoulder. Henderson and Doris had gone off in quick succession, and they were in there, you know, one game away from a Grand Slam or 1.5, and they were laughing. What does that say about a team that's sort of forgotten what it's like to truly be under the cosh because they have that much faith?
Well, I think they're enjoying their rugby. They all understand how each other plays. They run really good line. What epitomised it for me was just before half-time when Scotland had real pressure on the Irish line, and the defensive work of Van der Fleer to win a turnover with James Lowe, but also that final play of the half when Porter is seen making the prop forward, making a tackle in the corner, a desperate tackle to knock the Scottish player into touch. Yeah, just their work rate in defence when put under pressure was exemplary, and I think that just shows that the team are working for each other. In attack, you know, we know the efficiency that they have in attack, and I think it was stuttering that a little bit. But then they brought on Gibson Park, and he has been the real driver of the Leinster team in the speed that they play at and the accuracy that he has. And he showed that in for the Irish team in this game. And you know, the box kick he put up was right on the money for Hansen to be able to run onto and win it. And just his speed of pass and timing of pass and decision making that he has is superb. So I thought it was a great test match. Second half petered out a little bit when it went to 22-7. But I thought Scotland had their opportunities and they didn't finish them. But I felt they didn't finish them because of really good defence by Ireland.
I can't see too many teams who lose two hookers managing to cope with it with such aplomb. You know, I mean, for Van der Fleer to come out, I can't remember what the line out stats were, but I think they win 6 of his 8 throws or 5 of his 8 throws or whatever. And
Nick, I was shouting at the television, stick the jumper at the front, Scotland, and put him under pressure, and he won't win the line out.
You know what? I think the way he was...
They gave him the space to go to. And that was so disappointing.
Yeah, I think the way I take the point, but I think the way that he adapted and the way he was playing, I still think he would probably have managed to fire the dart over the first pod. But and also
he'd
Cian
thrown him
Healy.
before, hadn't he, Nick? I mean, he must have practiced. He had a really good.
Listen,
arrows.
that's the thing about going back to all really successful teams. England 2003, they've got a plan for most, if not all, eventualities, and they had a plan. You know, for Cian Healy to come in, go to hooker, and effectively, I mean, the Scottish front row. I thought Gregor Townsend. Listen, it's very difficult, you know, the replacement business and so on. I thought Gregor Townsend made a serious bench error in taking off the two starting Scottish props and bringing on, I can't remember exactly what stage, but it was probably about 55 minutes, something like that, bringing on Bergen and Batty. And with Healy on, they were too powerful. The Irish were too powerful for them. And the game really, you know, it was one of the hinge points, definitely not the only one, but a hinge point. So Ireland's ability to adapt on the hoof, but also the preparation and the work that they do, the depth of the work that they do in training and so on, it paid off, and it will pay off in the World Cup as well. I'm pretty sure that the idea that Ireland will do a World Cup head plant is receding.
But I think England will challenge them this weekend. I really do. Yeah, England. I felt England challenged them with 14 men at Twickenham last year, and I feel that England have that ability, as Scotland showed, to challenge them in the tackle, but also Ireland give you a little bit more space to play.
Okay.
And I think if England can get there, if England get on the front foot, they've got the ball carriers on the front foot, and that's what Scotland were able to show. And I think that's the key for England this weekend, is to get there, to make the difference in their ball carriers, as they did with the try that they scored. If they can get that consistently, they can put this Irish side under pressure.
What changes would you make, Andy?
I feel Ben Earls has got to come in. Yeah, I think he's got a bit of dynamism. He's got something about him. I haven't been involved in any of the discussions around why has he not been playing, but there's obviously something that Eddie Jones or Steve has not liked about him. And I wouldn't know what that is, but he looks a good player. I think
you bring Dan Cole in at tight head.
I think Sinclair. I think it would be a good kick up the backside for Sinclair, and I think Sinclair would come off the bench and perform. Yep, I think I could see that as a good decision to have. I would even think about, so I like Willis. Yeah, I think he's a quality player. I like Ludlam. I think Don Brandt is a good player, but I think that maybe Ludlam should go at 8, just to bring that real dynamism of that carries, just a bit more physicality, aggression that he brings. And I would think about Ben Earls coming into that back row again to match the competitiveness that the Irish have got. And I just think about the lock situation. I understand why Johnny Hill's not picked, because Johnny Hill at times has given a lot of penalties away. But I think you need somebody of that ilk in around that group that's going to bring a bit of edge about them. And I think that the pack needs that little bit of bite about it. Tuolangi's got to, I think, sort of with Ollie Lawrence not available, I think Tuolangi's got to come into the mix. And then you've got to look, just one other decision is Porter is a real glue of a player. He played well for England. He does some really good things. And I wonder whether Steve, because of what he's seen of him playing at Leicester and how he's played, might just bring him into the midfield.
What for Henry Slade?
For Henry Slade, yeah. But I think sort of there's I really like Henry Slade. So he's got a left foot kicking game as well. So it gives you that balance. So we'll lose that kicking game if Slade's not on the field. But I think that, I think you've got to really go at that Irish backline because they give you some space to play, and we've got to be able to really attack it. And I think Watson will be given space, and we can see some of his real attributes as a runner in this game.
And I see your old mate Stuart Barnes would pick Bernals at 12.
I was just about to say that.
Which is, we get these ones pop up occasionally. It's not the daftest idea, but there is man who's fit and available on this occasion. So, I mean, probably no point, but you do fancy seeing Bernals have a go in the backs one day.
Yeah, but not before he's done it at club level.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea of doing a Bergamasco in midfield doesn't appeal to me at all.
Against Grand Slam chasing Ireland in Dublin, what could go wrong?
But they say that about the back row and the centres. They are interchangeable. If you watch the games they play nowadays and the way they play them, they're playing in similar ways. So,
you would fancy playing in the centre then, would you, Andy?
I would have fancied playing fly half, that's for sure. Bit slow though. But, I look at this as we've talked about, England to respond, and I think that this is a great test for them to show their credibility and to show that the work they've been doing for the last 6-7 weeks that Steve's been there, that it all comes together. After the disappointment of the weekend.
Yeah, and the potential to be a real momentum boost as well going forward. Before we look ahead to next weekend, Andy, should we do your random rugby 15, the quick fire 15 questions very quickly?
If you really need to.
I'd like to. If you wouldn't like to, that's totally fine. Okay, nickname.
Well, my wife called me the blonde bombshell. But that's when I had long blonde hair. And as you heard, that I was called Robbo by Nick straight away, or Brendan. They called me Robbo, so Robbo was probably my nickname. But I was also called Mr. Angry by Austin Healy quite a bit. So that would probably be the one. I was quite an angry person as a rugby player.
Best rugby memory.
Well, as a coach, it's got to be the Rugby World Cup final. Phenomenal game of rugby. Sort of the whole 100 minutes. It ebbed and flowed, but it was the end of sort of the climax of 3 great years together and working for that one goal.
Most embarrassing rugby memory.
Well, I was playing for the Southwest against the All Blacks, and we were leading at the time 12-9 in Redruth. And unfortunately, I missed a tackle on Aaron Penne. I say I missed a tackle. I was on his back and he was carrying me forward as he picked up from a scrum. And he offloaded onto the inside to Twigamala, who then passed to Jamie Joseph. And we lost by 1 score against the All Blacks. So I'm still ribbed about that a lot. In fact, me missing that tackle meant that Neil Back didn't get selected for England against the All Blacks because he was too small. So, but that was it's still great to me that I missed that tackle. Pre-game
tune.
I was psyched up on a Thursday, so I didn't really need a pre-game tune. But I suppose the one that I would have loved would be Madness, One Step Beyond.
Nice. Post-game meal.
That would be a vegetarian lasagna.
Wow, nice. Best player you've played against?
Can I have 2?
Yes.
Because in my position, it would be Peter Winterbottom, who was a phenomenal rugby player, really tough, but also skillful as a ball player in his later years, and as a player to mark in the backs was Jonathan Davis, Jiffy. I played against him in Neath in the Knoll, and I only touched him once, and that was a late tackle. So he was absolutely brilliant.
2 former guests on the podcast you've picked there. Best player you've played with?
That'll be the current president of Bath, John Hall, who was an absolute phenomenal blindside flanker, who would have had a lot more caps for England, barring his knee injury that he had. But he was just a brilliant player, and in the professional era, would have been world class.
Favorite player right now?
Tom Curry has it all, and hopefully will come back fit and be able to show how good he is.
Rugby idol?
That is Jean-Pierre Rives, for the blonde hair, but also his courageousness. And as a child growing up, watching the Five Nations on the telly was just brilliant.
Favorite stadium?
Twickenham.
Favorite gym exercise?
As a lot of people will tell you, I wasn't very good in the gym, so I'll probably say it was a plank.
We have had someone say plank before. It was Martin Whitcomb, which did surprise me a little bit. Occupation if rugby didn't exist?
I'll be a teacher, school teacher.
Superstitions?
Well, I didn't really have superstitions either, but one that I have had as a coach is to make sure that the team run on the Friday is not absolutely perfect, because every perfect team run we had, and I remember one in 2001 against Ireland, where it was the best team run you will ever see, and we performed poorly on the Saturday. So make sure your team runs aren't perfect.
How would you make sure they're not perfect? You just like
you
trip someone up.
A few things to mess it up. Yes.
Rugby law you would change?
The number of substitutions. I think we've got to go down to 5 substitutions and be able to manage it in that way.
Best thing about working in rugby?
I love the whole match day, the build up to the game in the morning, to going to the stadium, the supporters being there, and just the challenges of playing against different teams, the whole coaching, and then the celebration afterwards, a few drinks. So I think all match days for me are brilliant occasions.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that, Andy.
Ollie, I'm just going to jump in there. And Andy missed one embarrassing moment. I think it was 2002. He was invited out to Bucharest to help coach the Romanians.
2000.
Going through a rough 2000, going through a rough time, and England were playing them, and it was a bit of a missionary effort from the RQ. It was about 90 degrees in Bucharest in whenever it was, and a couple of us scribes had gone along for the trip, and Andy was running around coaching his arse off, and we were on the touchline, and some of the local boys came out, and in this proper drinks canister, it was 80% proof Slimovich, I think it was, and Andy was pouring sweat. He came running across. Brendan, water. So I threw it to him, and he necked this stuff, and more or less died on the spot.
It was Palinka, wasn't it?
It was awful, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And who's
I still remember that time, Brendan. When I've been out there the last 3 years, they've loved it. They kept remembering all that and the fun that we had, with it.
It was a lovely trip, that actually. They were really into it. And do you remember they didn't have Bucharest was a mess, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But they took us to a little dachau, whatever they call it, and everything they had they gave to us for a bit of lunch before we went home, and it was terrific. Yeah, and you did a great job there coaching them and just keeping the flag flying, because they were in desperate states at the time, weren't they?
I can recommend you going there now. The stadium is brilliant. There's a 10,000 stadium. Right where we trained, and that when we went out there, but also, sort of there's a good ability amongst the squad. So they'll be interesting in the World Cup, how they do.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that again, Andy, and thank you for that addition, Brendan. It sounds like it was just as much your fault as it was Andy. That drink got necked. I want to talk about Wales, Italy, but I think we're going to bypass that for time. And I do promise our Welsh and Italian listeners that we will do a rundown of them as we do a review of the tournament. Let's just look ahead to the final weekend. And really the big one is Ireland, England. And we have looked ahead to that somewhat. I think the one thing that's worth mentioning, Brendan, is that there's the prospect of a St. Patrick's Day Grand Slam in Dublin, a first ever Grand Slam in Dublin. I mean, how much do you wish you were out there for that, if it does go that way?
That'd be incredible. And that's after 4 days at Cheltenham. I mean, there's going to be tens of thousands of Irishmen barely alive, women barely alive if that happens. I'm like with Andy. I think England will turn up and they will perform, but this Ireland side has got a solidity and a nous about it that I don't see them blowing that one.
No.
So I think my prediction of a Grand Slam from 2 months ago is fairly safe.
It's funny.
Yeah, but you predict that every year, Brent.
Well, it's funny.
What I would say is if they do achieve it, they deserve it.
Yeah,
They really do
exactly.
deserve it. It's one of those where you look at they've been challenged and they've met the challenges that have been there for them. It's not been easy for them. So credit to them. They found a way to beat Italy when they were underperforming and Italy were playing well. So, so if they do make it, it's a well-deserved Grand Slam.
Yeah. And if you are listening and you're in Dublin and the party does come about, then on our behalf, please do enjoy the party. Yeah, Brendan, it was funny you started bragging about your predictions there because you actually had a bit of a shocker of a weekend.
Did I?
Yeah, you
Can't
did.
even remember what I predicted.
Well, you're now a member of the Turkey Club. You were the ostracized member of the Rugby Paper podcast, but you are now a part of it because you predicted, I think it was an Italy win in Rome.
Oh, yes, I did, yeah.
It didn't.
Well, they should have won, to be fair, but no.
They should have, but
they should have won.
Didn't I get the exact result in that one, Ollie?
No. But Nick, you did predict a Wales win, as did I. So, well, Nick, you're still in the wooden spoon position. Chris has surpassed you by some way. He actually had a very good weekend. He's not here to sing his own praises, so I'll do that for him.
I'm appalled to hear that.
Yeah, I know. Well, and Nick, you're in last place. You're the defending champion. You need to make something happen. You predicted an England win in Dublin. So, well, Andy's already alluded to it, but I want to say that there's not a single fibre in your body that believes that will happen.
I haven't predicted an England win in Dublin.
Yes, you have.
Have I?
Yeah.
By what margin? Tell me.
35-24 to England.
Who, me?
Oh, that's a big score.
Yeah.
I must have been on the Slivovitz.
That's a big score.
Yeah, that's quite significant, Nick. So go on, justify that one.
Do you know something? I'm a little bit flummoxed because I've got something very different down on my predictions in front of me.
I will have to. I will when we go off air. I will check the email you sent me. But
yeah, I think you're on the Slivovitz.
Yeah, well, permanently at the moment, to be fair. So maybe. All right. Well, in which case, either you're not standing by it or you're being made stand by it. Andy, justify your prediction then, because you predicted 23-20 to England.
I think England's defence will be a lot better. They'll kick their penalties in this game, so it'll be 20-18 to Ireland, and England will score a maul at the end to win 23-20.
Very bold.
So there you go. So I think England will score a try from their maul in this game, and I think their mauling game will create penalties, give them field position, and I really feel that they'll take their opportunities. To go to Ireland, to beat Ireland, they've got to keep the scoreline to 20 or below. And I feel that this England defence really has to step up in this game, and I think they'll do that.
And you know what, Nick? You are absolutely right. What I've done is I've taken your Ireland-Scotland prediction. So I apologise.
I see. I've got Ireland 30, England 17.
30, yeah, you're right. So Andy, you're out on your own in that prediction then. Good. How did I do that? I'm now questioning everything I've done with the predictions league.
You see, Hewitt's going to be demanding a recount now that you've had this.
No, he's not here. We won't speak of this, and then he won't.
No, okay.
He won't listen back, so it's fine. The other surprising prediction, Brendan, you've got Scotland drawing against Italy at Murrayfield.
Well, my theory was, again, 8 weeks ago, that Italy were going to get something out of the tournament, and I think they're playing well enough to get a result. Now, actually, am I expecting a draw? Possibly not. But then again, they're ballpark. They're ballpark. So let's stick with it.
Well, obviously, a draw is a bold result to predict because you're odds on likely to get the result wrong. But if it does,
1 in 14, I think it is. So we've had 12 matches. So I'm hoping that.
There's bound to be one draw. So yeah, Nick, you're in last place on 54. Chris is on 58. Andy, you're playing on a team with Jerry Guscott, Scott Hastings, Jiffy, and oh my God, last week.
Frank Cotton.
Thank you.
Frank Cotton. Who predicted a glorious England win.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that kind of stitched you up a little bit. So you're in third place on 59. Brendan, you're on 61, and I've taken a little bit of a lead. I had quite a good weekend, so I'm on 75.
Oh, wow.
Could be a bit of a swing. Yeah, stay tuned with the Predictions League. We'll wrap up there, I think, guys. We ran over a little bit today, but Andy, I'm guessing you're not watching any rugby live at any stadiums this weekend, but enjoy it from the peace of Bath. And thank you very much for joining us.
I really enjoyed it, and great to see you guys again.
Likewise.
Great to see you, Robert.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.